wanted to do a double date, but not with my husband. He fake agreed and took revenge on me that day. Hi, Redditors. Life comes at you fast and in ways you never expected it to come for you. I had my life ruined because I had acted on something that I thought would be harmless. Naturally, it was supposed to be a harmless act, and I had wanted to try it out because I had felt it would spice up my marriage and make my husband more protective over me. You know, like to value what he had, that kind of thing. Well, what I had thought would go smoothly backfired big time in my head. I wanted to do a double date because my friend from college had been pushing for it, and it was like we barely got to hang out since we got married. So I agreed and told my husband of 5 years about it, whom I had borne a child for. My husband hadn't even acted like I had told him something, and this was how it had been in our marriage ever since I gave birth to my son 3 years ago. So I had thought to spice up the double date and go with my friend's husband while my friend went with mine. And go home with our exchange partners for the night, but obviously nothing was going to happen. It was just going to be a fun night. That was what I had planned. I hadn't meant for everything to go haywire in my life from that night alone. Anyway, I told my husband about the plan and the date, and I was so shocked at how he agreed so easily. I should have known something was up with that. I should have guessed that something was about to go down. I should never have agreed to the double date. By 8 in the evening, my friend's husband came to pick me up and we headed off to the restaurant, sealing off my fate as a very stupid woman. The new definition of stupid was me. We got to the restaurant and my friend and my husband were already waiting. My friend hadn't had any qualms with the double date and the idea I had in mind to spice it off. She was even with me because she wanted her husband to appreciate her in a new light if he saw another man's hands all over her. The date had been calm, and I would have never expected the outcome of the experience to be totally different from the beginning. I mean, my husband had agreed to it. However, I hadn't known he had fake agreed to it. After dinner at the restaurant we had booked, we left off to go and spend some time together at a park. We had played games together, and my husband hadn't even looked the slightest bit uncomfortable or angry through the whole thing. I was even mad that he seemed more comfortable with my friend than with me. I was livid. I had done all this to get his attention, and he was smiling over my friend. Can you imagine that? Anyway, my friend hadn't known about the second phase of the date where we would spend some time with our partners at their home before going home. So I had insisted my husband drop her off at our home and that my friend's husband would take me back, and we would all reconverge at my home, and my friend's husband would take my friend home, and we would call it a night. But what they didn't know was that I wanted more time with my friend's husband. I went home with my friend's husband and he took me to their place, and I was finally alone with the man I had been having an affair with that wasn't my husband. You all didn't expect that, did you? Well, I didn't expect my husband to find out either. But there I was with my lips on my friend's husband when my husband barged into the room and caught us, and I was shocked. Then my whole life flashed before my eyes as my husband flung me away and started beating up my friend's husband. And my friend was right behind him with her eyes open just as wide as mine were. This was not how the night was supposed to go. The next thing I heard had been sirens, and the police barged into the house, and I was expecting them to pick my husband up for starting a fight, but they walked up to me and claimed I was under arrest for forgery and theft. My husband had gotten me arrested. Lol, I'm sure you guys weren't expecting this in the slightest. And maybe I deserved it and even much more, but that's up for you to decide. I don't care much what you all on this space think. My name is CLO, short for my official name, which I can't reveal here. I'm 31 years old. I'll call my husband Leo. I think he's also 31 or 32. I don't know. Leo is not his real name either. I'm using it for clarity's sake. Now into the main event of how and why I ended up arrested. I got to know Leo when we were still in high school. He was the quiet and charming type that looked unapproachable but was very nice and friendly once you got to know him. I had just transferred to the school, and the person the principal had me meet was Leo, because of course he was a straight A student. This was how our friendship begun. I started hanging out with him. I was the one doing the whole clingy thing because I didn't know who else to talk to at school. I didn't have any friends, and I wasn't about to start making friends. So I forced myself on Leo in a platonic way, of course. He hung out with me, and that's how we spent our high school days until we graduated and moved on to college. I didn't see Leo again after our high school graduation because we left to different colleges. Fast forward 4 years later, after I had just graduated from college, I bumped into Leo again. But this time it was at a friend's party. My friend Lila, who I had been having an affair with her husband. Lila had invited me to her 22nd birthday party. I had met her in college, and she was one of my closest friends, so I had gone. I had gone for the party, and there I had seen Leo, looking fine and more mature. We laughed and talked over some drinks and exchanged contacts. Then we started seeing each other. Leo was a great person to be with, but he was always focused on his business and work, and frankly, I didn't think he would be interested in seeing me. Then one day on one of our regular dinner dates, Leo asked me to be his girlfriend. No sensible girl was going to say no to that. I said yes, and so we moved on to dating. Leo and I dated for 2 years, and I saw a future with him, actually. I loved him, and I didn't notice that him not paying attention to me was going to cause problems in our marriage. After dating for 2 years, Leo and I got married in a small, intimate ceremony with just my family and his family. I think this was where I started having issues with him. He never listened to me. I had told Leo that I wanted a big wedding, one I could show off to my friends and maybe socials. I hadn't been happy with how the wedding planning and the ceremony itself had turned out. He had handed everything over to his mom to plan, and I didn't like my dress and everything. But I couldn't complain because I was getting married to the man I loved. I thought to myself the wedding could have been small, but the vacation would surely be bigger. LOL, there wasn't even a vacation. 1 year into marriage, and it wasn't like what I had dreamed. Sure, he took care of me and provided for me, but I felt like this wasn't how marriage was supposed to be. Leo was always out hustling for his business and money and was always all about work. Even when he got back home, it was like his brain couldn't rest. If I was talking to him, he would zone out on me or be working on his laptop and wouldn't seem to hear what I said until I asked for the 3rd time. Talking to my husband now seemed like a hassle, and it wasn't supposed to be how a marriage worked, was it? Even when we marked our 1-year anniversary, it was like a waste of money because he had seemed aloof. I had even wondered why he had bothered to book the weekend getaway, because it had just been like as if I was there for myself. If we hadn't gone, I wouldn't have met Lila's husband and I wouldn't have gotten myself into this mess. Yes, I would have still been happily married by putting in the effort to make my marriage work and not trying to sort myself out from jail. Anyway, this was where my downfall and the web of lies had all started, my 1-year anniversary. Leo had booked a trip that he couldn't be bothered to pay attention for it, and I had been left alone to wander around the hotel my husband had booked alone. Like I mentioned earlier, this was when I had met Lila's husband, and I swear I didn't know he was married to Lila, or was even affiliated with her at the time we met. If I had known from the beginning, I wouldn't have had anything to do with him, and by the time I had found out about it, it was already too late. I was already in too deep and couldn't get out of the wand of lies that had surrounded me. I met Lila's husband, Kelvin, not real name, when I had gone down for a spa massage while my husband was busy with work when he had come for a vacation. Kelvin made me laugh throughout the whole massage session. He had also been down and wanted to get a massage done and facials too. And in my whole life, I had never met a guy that was interested about the quality of his skin. So I was enthralled. I knew getting to be friends with another man while married was a signal for trouble, so I had tried to focus on my husband through the entire staycation, but it was a futile effort. Leo was always busy, like during the dinner that he had paid for. We had been halfway through it when his phone rang and he had to excuse himself to take the call. This was how I waited and waited, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 damn hours, and Leo didn't show up again. I was pissed because what was supposed to be romantic for me was a disaster. The waiters had to come and inform me that they wanted to shut down as it was already almost 4 in the morning. And you guys wouldn't believe that I had gotten back to the hotel and had found Leo on the bed sleeping like a baby. He had forgotten that he had left me back at the restaurant after the business call. I had laid into him because of that, and he had apologized, but I wanted to give you guys an example of how aloof and inattentive my husband was in our marriage before I got pregnant. Sorry for blabbing too much, LOL. I love the fact that you all are my audience. Anyway, I got close to Kelvin from the staycation, and because we had exchanged numbers to keep in touch. But trust me, I didn't have any idea in mind except friendship when we had been talking in the spa. Kelvin became my close friend, and throughout that time we had talks and grew close to each other. At this time, I still didn't know he had anything to do with Lila. In fact, I didn't know he had anything to do with Lila until I had slept with him. Yes, another plot twist, I slept with Kelvin. But I'm sure you all saw this coming. It was an honest-to-God mistake. I hadn't known how we had gotten to that level until it actually happened. We had become close, and I was spending a lot of time with him while my husband was away facing his business and not paying any mind to me. It was like Leo didn't care what I did, and I tried to get to take up interest in what he liked in his work, but he never encouraged me, so I just hung out with Kelvin instead. Kelvin, who had paid more attention to me than the man I had married. Well, long story short, I visited Kelvin one day at his home. Now that I think about it, it had been a guest house. And one thing led to another. We found ourselves unclothed and together in bed. I was appalled by what I had done, and I had stopped all my communication with Kelvin. I was so scared that my husband would find out and throw me out on my ear, so I had deleted all my chats with Kelvin and even deleted and blocked his number from calling me. I didn't want my husband to find out. I loved the man and wanted my marriage, so I couldn't let him find out that I had cheated on him. Fast forward to 2 months later, after I had blocked Kelvin, I discovered I was pregnant. And you guessed right again. It was Kelvin's child. I couldn't let my husband know that. I knew it was Kelvin's child from the depths of my heart, and if my husband found out, I was gone. So I made my husband sleep with me, and a month later I told him. I was pregnant, although I was 3 months along already. Feel free to call me all types of names in the comment, but I did what I had to do to secure a future for my son and myself. Besides, my husband was the father of my child on paper, and that was all that mattered. And you all needed to witness how much Leo began taking care of me once he found out I was pregnant. It was like I had transformed into a god before his very eyes. My whole pregnancy journey made me love my husband even more. He treated me like the golden egg, getting me whatever I wanted and treating me like I shouldn't be made to lift a finger. I thought from there my life was going to be smooth sailing, but I was so wrong. If I had been told that 3 years later that I'll be arrested and facing a lawsuit and divorce papers, I wouldn't have taken this path in my life. I would have been the perfect wife and tried to make my marriage work. I regret it surely, but what could I do? I had already entangled myself in the lies from the moment I told my husband that I was pregnant. No, from the first time that I met Kelvin. I was already in it. What do you guys think? I should have confessed from the start? Well, it was already too late for that. I met Kelvin again at my baby shower El Mao. This was when I found out that he and Lila had been dating for over 2 years. Yes, our fling was just a year, and so he was dating my friend while we had an affair. I was so shocked, and Kelvin also found out that the child was his. I never told him, but he found out just by looking at the baby, and then he asked me, and I had to confess that it was him that was the father. I hadn't known the bastard would use that information to try to blackmail, but I'm getting to that. I confronted him about dating my friend, and he had just simply shrugged. He then had the audacity to ask when I was going to give him his son, and I told him he was never going to get anywhere near my child. I think it was this statement that had triggered him. He couldn't reveal that the baby was his to everyone at the shower because that would expose his cheating ass to Lila, so he shut it, and that event passed. After I gave birth to my son, my husband's attitude switched back to normal. He loved our son, sure, but then he stopped treating me with the care and attention he had treated me with when I was pregnant. Fast forward again, 2 years later, my life was okay. I had learned to live with my husband without hassle. I had even forged a DNA test result for when he had asked me for it. Desperate time called for crazy measures, and I wanted to be prepared for any situation. There are people that have done worse than me, so don't judge me. I wanted my child to have a father, and I didn't think Kelvin was going to end up being in my life, or I was going to end up seeing the inside walls of prison. I had never thought I was going to set the trap for my downfall. Everything I had thought was erased. I mean, I had stayed 2 years without any questions or my husband finding out. But all that was about to blow up in my face. I received a call one day that I needed to pay a sum of money to an account, or they were going to expose my secret to my husband. I hadn't known it was Kelvin at that time, and I was scared that the person was going to act on his word, so at first daylight I transferred what I had in my savings to the person's account that minute. You know, at that point when you have a secret to hide, and you can resort to anything to cover it up. That was where I was at that point, and Kelvin knew, so he had used that to his advantage. He came back again and again for more money, and I had to resort to selling off my things after I had exhausted the option of asking my parents for money. Then one day I had gathered the courage to tell the blackmailer to do his worst that I didn't have any money to give him. And then the blackmailer revealed who he was, that is Kelvin, and he was just trying to gather money to be able to start off something for himself so he could leave Lila. This was someone that they had been married for 2 years. Anyway, he went off like he wanted to leave Lila and come for custody of his son, so he was blackmailing me to give him money. And do you even want to know what was more stupid than his excuse? What was more stupid was that I fell for it. My husband had left me and focused on work once again and only cared about his son, and I seemed to remember how it was with Kelvin, and let me not lie. I had fantasized getting married to Kelvin, so I had stupidly believed him. I was a shitty person, I know, but I had nothing to depend on from my husband. No showings of feelings from him, no showcasing of his love in words, affirmations, nothing, nada. I was frustrated, and I listened to Kelvin and fell for him again, and he was telling me how he wanted us to be together. I had not been stupid about the money I had given him, of course. I had asked him about it. He had told me he would give me back in double fold when I was finally his. I fell for his sweet talks for the second time, and I began to do his bidding. It was like I had been brainwashed and couldn't think for myself. It was just easy things at first. Get a valuable thing and pawn it and send the money to Kelvin. And I would do it. I would give him what he wanted, whatever it was. He flirted with me and made me laugh like before, and I was completely gone for Kelvin while I had a husband. I had even considered divorcing my husband so the web of lies would stop. But then Kelvin had advised me that if I do, I wouldn't be able to get a share of my husband's property, that I should be taking it little by little until I had gotten enough, and then I would file for divorce, and we would get married and live with our son. This may seem like a trick, but this was my life. Now that I think about it, it was like a kind of spell had covered my eyes that I was always willing to do what he wanted. Could you imagine that? I'm not narrating a fiction piece, but my real-life experience, and as I'm typing this, I can't even believe that I had fallen for that nonsense. Well, after the person that had made you do all the evil things had disappeared, and you were the one going crazy with the bail bill and community service. I guess the eye gets clear after the evil action has been done, and it's time to dance to the consequences, LOL. And I danced like a madman. Anyway, Kelvin stopped for a bit and just simply tried to build a relationship between us again, like get him and me together on the same sexual page. He was the perfect manipulator. And because of that, I started seeing my husband as someone that had never wanted to marry me in the first place. This was because Kelvin acted so perfectly with me. He said the right things and all the things I wanted to hear. I had even confronted my husband about it once. I'd almost let it slip that I was always talking with Lila's husband. That would have raised Leo's eyebrows. It surely had to have raised Leo's eyebrows because the night I had confronted him, I was pretty emotional and raised my voice. I had asked him why he didn't like me and only showered our son with attention and affection, and why he never wanted to talk to me and saw me as a pesky little cockroach. Leo had just stared at me like I was talking through my nose, and I had told him that Lila's husband was the total opposite of him, and he had looked at me like I had just said something to put in the final clue in a puzzle. I had to cover up for myself by saying that it was what Lila had talked about when she was describing her husband, that I had used to say what I had said. The next day, Leo said he wanted to take our son to the hospital for his monthly checkup, but I was way ahead of him on it. I knew he wanted to go and do a DNA test. I just didn't know it would be what I had said that had caused him to think I had slept with my friend's husband, so I had followed behind him to the hospital, and luckily it was my friend Lila that was working on that shift. After they had been done with everything that was necessary to conduct a test, and she had sent them home to come back the next day, I had walked up to Lila 30 minutes later and told her we already had the paternity test record, and had just misplaced, so there was no need for us to do it a second time. She believed me obviously because she was my friend, and even though I was trying to hide something, she would hide it with me and not rat me out. So I gave her the document from the one I had brought to prove to her. It didn't look fake in her eye, and she had handed it back to me. I knew I could give it to my husband from this because if it could pass an eligibility check by a healthcare officer, my husband would never know it was fake. So I handed it over to my husband, and he hadn't questioned that it was fake, and I even tried to make him feel guilty for wanting to conduct a DNA check to see if our son was his. A little while later, Kelvin started up with asking for things again, and I had to resort to forging my husband's signature on his checks. This was a talent I had, copying people's handwriting and calligraphy. Yes, they were people like that. I used to sign my homework sheet with my mom's signature in middle school. At first, I had taken only little amounts from my husband's account, and I took from the one that he wouldn't notice. I had studied Leo's accounts to know which he checks frequently and which he doesn't. I told you guys I had tried to take interest in his business and the things he liked. I'm sure you must have wondered why I hadn't just asked him for money. I had thought of that, but through the time I was talking with Kelvin, my mind had no control of its own. I only did what Kelvin wanted. I didn't think that I was going to be caught. Another stupid statement to make. I had just been utterly stupid from the day I met Kelvin. I betrayed my friend, slept with her husband, and was even dreaming of having a thing for said husband. I was in a loop. Anyway, a month passed and I noticed a pattern. When I gave Kelvin what he wanted for the week, he would disappear and not talk to me. And then when he wanted me to steal another money from my husband, he would begin his sweet talking, and I fell for it every single time. It was his idea to do the double date, and I had sold it to my husband. Kelvin had told me that after the date, I should send my husband divorce papers and pack my things and my son's things, and we would disappear with him. That the double date was so he could show the world how well we looked together before we disappeared. I just realized I was a victim of, is it cyberbullying or cyber sweet talk? But I got into it myself, and I could have come out, but I hadn't come out. I had decided to be deceived by Kelvin. So long story short, we did the double date with our spouses, and the night ended with me sleeping in a jail cell after being charged for forging my husband's signature and stealing his money. Everything cleared from my eye at this moment, and I realized I was about to lose my marriage and my child and my husband, so I began to beg. Leo had followed us to the police station and had served me divorce papers and ordered me to sign it if I didn't want my sentence to be even double. I panicked and hurriedly signed and was begging him to forgive me that I didn't know what came over me. My husband had just said he would see me in court. Then he went on to ask me how stupid I was. Lol, that was a laughable moment because I couldn't exactly measure how stupid I had come to be. Leo asked if I didn't for 1 second think that I was taking money from his bank without his knowledge, and I just sat there quiet and humbled and filled with regret. Apparently, he also knew my son wasn't his. He had known from the moment he had done his own DNA test when I was still at the hospital. I was shocked senseless. He had just played that DNA test game with me so he could watch me scramble around and try to cover up my tracks. Then I went behind his back to steal money from him. I spent the night in jail, and I thought Kelvin would have been arrested too, but he had successfully managed to flee the country. He had also injured 2 police officers amongst a list of other crimes. It turned out that he was a professional scammer and had only been with Lila to scam her of her money, but she had been tight-lipped, and the process had proved difficult, so he had resorted to me, the easy target. Oh gosh, Lila. The shock on Lila's face when she had seen her husband and I together was still imprinted on my brain, and I didn't have any words for it. I hope she forgives me wherever she is. I got a lawyer after placing a phone call to my parents. I had lied to them that the lawyer was to settle my divorce issues and not defend me against charges of forgery and theft. Anyway, by the time court day came around, with the help of my lawyer, I managed to get off with a fine and community service work and no access to my child. My child was going to enter the system because his mother was a criminal, and Leo refused to claim the boy as his because he wasn't his. I was heartbroken and couldn't even begin to describe how I felt when I heard that judgment. I had to pay off a fine of $5,000, and I ran into huge debts just from paying that money alone and settling with my lawyer. My parents had said they wanted nothing to do with me again after giving me $3,000, like they were selling me off. The news had reached them about what I did, and my father had called to tell me that he never wanted to see my face again. So my son, my parents, my husband, my friend, all gone from my life over the web of lies I had gotten myself into and the person I had gotten acquainted with. I should never have agreed to that double date, but sooner or later, I would have still been in the mess I was. In fact, I should never have met Kelvin. I should have made my marriage work and stay married to Leo. I should have made him love me, but now I had no one at my back. There's nothing in this world that is worse than having no one in your circle. Update. Hi, this is 2 years later, and I am still reaping the consequences of my actions. I've read all the comments about how wicked I am to have done that to my husband and try to pass it off like I was being controlled. I've also seen the name-calling. You gouts are having a field day with my suffering, but it's calm. It could have happened to you. Anyway, immediately after rounding up community services for 2 months, I was arrested again and charged to court for forgery of hospital documents. I knew that had to be Lila's handiwork. She had brought the attention of the forged documents to the hospital's notice, and I was arrested again, and Lila had struck at the perfect time. I was still in debt and didn't have anybody on my side to help me. I was charged with 21 months imprisonment and the option to pay a fine, but I didn't have any money to get myself out of this mess, so I had to go to prison. Those had been the worst months of my life because I had seen a lot. I'd almost died, and I had the scars to prove it. Anyway, I got out a few months ago and just thought to update you guys on my life. Yes, I'm still alive and regretting every day why I had changed the course of my life. I couldn't get a job with my criminal record, and anywhere I went, it was like people knew about me or something. Like I had the words criminal pasted on my forehead. I had been job hunting for over 2 months, and I couldn't even find the basic job as a waitress. I regret ever spoiling my marriage with the idea of a double date. I'd even ran into Leo. Okay, I had gone to his house and watched from the shadows. Apparently he married another woman, and the woman was Lila, and they had a child. Guess it served me right.